fact that this lectern is the best lectern ever, I'm going to try and walk around. I can't stand a lectern, so I'm going to walk around if that's all right and try this. So yeah, my name's Justin Dye. I'm a managing partner at ERM. I look after what we call operational performance across Europe, Middle East and Africa. I come from a very sort of practical background. I've been on probably about 500 different sites across all different sectors. So some of my talk is not going to be very specific to mining, but I've done a lot of work in mining, but it's more general. And I want to talk to you about what we understand about operational performance. And when I say EHSS, that's environment, health, safety, social, it could be sustainability. It's a nebulous term, really, about what we're talking about here in CSI. So it's an incredibly broad range of topics. But my point about this really is, yes, it's all well and good with looking after and protecting environment, but actually there's three main elements that we're all working to. One is to protect value. How do we use environment, health, safety, CSR type work to protect company value? How can we use it to enhance company value? Which is, so protecting value really is all about risk management. Enhancing value is about basically improving performance. And then ultimately value creation, which is about creating something new that brings profit to the companies. So every company is looking for this, and it's then really, how does the sustainability agenda fit in, and how can we maximize that opportunity? I want you to look, the reason I'm sort of standing really, I want you to look at the things on the right-hand side here, which say, if you can't read it, it's things like tighter regulations, declining tolerance of risk in the populations of the world, investor pressure, NGO campaigns, media. If you just take a minute to think within your organizations, which ones of these are affecting you? Which ones of these do you think are really important to you as an organization, or are giving you pressures? I mean, if you look at the regulations, the amount of regulations that have come out over time has grown phenomenally. If you look at environmental regulation, if you do a Google search and say, when was the first environmental regulation? It comes up with a couple of ones in Scandinavia in the sort of 1950s. And then there's one major one in the UK, which was called the Clean Air Act, which came in 1956, because in 1952, 4,000 people died in London due to a smog of all the smoke. So really, this is incredibly new. All these regulations that maybe we're getting through are literally 50 years, 60 years old. So this is a very new environment. If you look at investor pressure, as I say, I've been doing this for about 30 years. Investors were never really at all interested in sustainability. They used to loan money until one or two major events occurred with the World Bank loaning money. So, and now every investor is sending companies huge amounts of forms to fill out about what their risks are and how they're managing those risks and what the opportunities are. If you think about NGO campaigns, when I first started work, there were two that I was aware of. There was Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of NGO campaigns, some of them incredibly specific to a particular newt or a particular, a particular bat or something. And then media spotlight has obviously completely changed, transformed over the last 30 years. It was about 10 years ago when I used to sort of talk to clients about that. We'd just find a newspaper in the morning and you'd flick through and see if you could find anything on environment, health, safety, and invariably you'd find one. If you do that now, you find loads. And the whole social media change is phenomenal. One of my clients had an issue at one of their mines, and they're a big major, and they have an enormous process that they have to follow to emergency response and escalation of issues. So despite that, he found out faster on Twitter than the entire internal organization could get to him that there was an issue that he had to deal with. So that's changing everything, the way Twitter and Facebook and all of those are operating. Now, if you ask, we've asked lots of companies, about 400 or 500 different clients, and said, okay, if we take a highly scientific timescale, A, B, C, D, and you look at performance expectations, what are stakeholders expecting? And you ask clients to say, where do you think we are on this spectrum? We initially gave them 3 lines. We gave them one like that, a straight line, and one going down. I.e., are the pressures getting more or less or about the same? And they basically all came back with this line. And then we said, okay, where would you put yourself on this line? Where would you say we are in time and these pressures that are building up? And about 95% of them saying we're here. So they're saying, we've got to a certain point, we've got a certain number of regulations, but we anticipate that this is going to increase exponentially. So what does that tell us, really? I think for me that just is quite interesting because it just shows that we're operating in an incredibly dynamic environment. The world of sustainability and HSE is moving so fast that what was good last year won't be good next year because new issues are coming up and new governments are changing things and perception in the population is changing hugely. So that's why I think we are. Now, if you look at actual performance, every company, almost without fail, is improving on their performance. They're having systems in place, they've got better leadership, they've got all these things going on. So their performance is improving. I guess the question is it improving anything like the rate of stakeholder expectations? And the answer, I think, is clearly no. But I think what we need to recognize is that you're never going to meet every stakeholder expectation. I think what we need to do is recognize that this gap is here and it's likely to continue to grow. So we have to just understand that and manage it rather than say we're going to meet every stakeholder's expectation. So then it comes to, well, which areas should we focus on? This is something I've taken from the Harvard Business Review. And this is really all about materiality. Understanding what is material to your business. And each business will have a different level of materiality. So I was at one company 3 or 4 weeks ago, and when we're talking about what's material to them, they said, well, any fatality is material. You talk to another company, admittedly a much bigger one, they said, well, one fatality is not material to us. Multiple fatality is material to us. And you say to one company, in financial terms, what's material on a CSR type issue? And they'll say 10 million, another one will say 100 million. But working out what the materiality is, this Harvard Business Review basically shows that if you focus on the immaterial issues, ones below what you consider material, of course, if you don't focus on them at all, your financial performance is going to go down. If you focus just exclusively on low risk, low material issues, it's about neutral. If you focus equally on low risk material issues and high risk material issues, your financial performance improves by about 2%. But if you focus only on material issues, your financial performance improves by 6%. Because you're focusing the organization on what is important to them rather than sort of generic standards or generic compliance. Now, this is just a model about how it all sort of fits together, if you like. On the left-hand side here, this is about the whole value chain of your operation. It's not focused on sites. So here, most of our work historically was focused on operations. And as I said, I've been to something like 500 sites around the world. But if you look at the entirety of a product, of an organization and where the value comes from, there's a whole things around products and the services. There's a whole lot in the supply chain. Clearly here, there's a lot in capital projects, contractors. So it's understanding the complete value chain, and then within that, what are the material, safety, health, environment, social, community, etc., issues that can impact those? So you're getting a much big picture, and we call it sustainability risk universe, like banks call things about the entire risk universe. But then you're looking at that and you're saying, okay, well, what's the EHS outcomes we want? What's the CSR outcomes? Well, you want less accidents. You want better compliance, better risk management. You want to enhance your license to operate. What happens in one place can impact your license to operate in another. You want to reduce resources, assure the board, etc. But then you need to take it, I think, to the next level is, what does that actually mean in financial terms? What is the value, the business value that these EHS outcomes can deliver for you? So it might be limiting liability. It might be OPEX. It might be Project NPV, bringing forward those projects. It was really interesting, the lady was talking earlier, that projects in the 1980s took 5 years to get through. Projects now take 20 years, and maybe in the next 10 years, they're going to take 30 years. If you look at some of the analysis of why that takes so long, CSR is an incredibly important point in why projects are taking longer. When I go talking about the graph I talked about earlier, where people were asking we were asking clients where they were on that graph, one of my clients stood up and said, well, I'm right at the top there. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it can't get any worse. And I was like, why not? He said, I manage drilling in Alaska for one of the big oil majors, and we've had a license for 10 years. We're 7 years in, and we haven't moved a single thing because of all the CSR issues. So CSR issues, you can quantify these. You can't quantify everything, but you can quantify a whole range of those. We did one work for a major client around the Project NPV, and we did an assessment looking back about the delays in the project and what had caused them. And as I said, the majority were or not the majority, a good number were CSR orientated. And then we looked into those processes. Brendan, I think you were talking about the processes that companies go through to the stage gates, if you like, that take time. Then we said, well, where do you need to look at each of these stage gates and how can you bring that forward? And they found somewhere in the order of $500 million of improvement because they're bringing projects forward quicker, because they're managing CSR more effectively. Sorry, and just coming back to that, when you've got the sustainability risk and you're trying to get these business outcomes, the only thing you've got to play with really is the stuff in the middle. And this is where we all play, essentially. So we're saying, what people programs do we have in place to deliver on our results? What are the processes we have in place? They might be management systems, they might be risk assessment, they might have all of those. How's our plant standing up? How's our equipment being managed? And then finally, what sort of data? What data are we collecting? How do we know the data we're collecting is the right data that's actually influencing our business? All of that sort of spreads around culture. And then the culture is developed by the leadership. So that is the process, that's the area we have to play in. And there's no use in just fixing one of these. In order to get good operational performance, you have to look at it in its entirety. If you take incidents, or when companies develop management systems and develop programs, they tend to develop something at the top, and then they train people down, and they develop policies and then procedures and then put them in. That's fine. The critical thing, though, when you're doing it the other way is to test that, is to actually come at the bottom end and say, okay, go out there, find fault, find risks, find errors, find mistakes. And you can group them broadly into 3 categories, which is there good risk control, or are you having incidents and accidents? Is there good compliance, or have you not got compliance? And this is a very broad one. Are the impacts you're having acceptable or unacceptable? Now, when you do that, if you start looking at why these are occurring, all of these generally occur because someone is making a decision. And it's someone at the front line, we'll call it front line. They are making a decision which delivers this. And that decision is either they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, or they haven't done something they should be doing. So then it's quite easy. You can just carry on blaming these guys and girls, saying you made the wrong decision, which has caused a major impact. But actually, you've got to go through that and say, well, what is driving their decision-making process? And it always comes back to the leaders of the organization, the behaviors that they demonstrate, because everyone follows a leader's behavior, and then the processes that they put in place to manage that effectively. So when you're testing, we always go back, but you're trying to say, well, you're running some quite big, complex companies, quite big, complex assets across a really broad range of potential sustainability topics that can either benefit you or are a risk to you. You need to make sure that the people in the organization are making the right decisions at each point in order to get the outcomes you want. So when you're doing this, it's not good enough just to have a sort of technical auditor or a technical assessor going in. You need people like organizational psychologists or human factors people or others who can understand that. But then when you're looking at all of this, and you've identified what you think is material, and then you're looking at your management processes, this really comes back a little bit to your point with the AAA down to C. Where do you want to be? How mature are you going to be across each of these? Can you afford to be AAA in Brendan's terms, or no in our terms, on everything? Well, probably not. So you need to choose which are the risk areas that are the most vulnerable, where the company or the organization has the most risk, and then decide against all of these, against the people plant process, how mature you want to be. And finally, you can present this in a huge number of different ways, but you're looking at really, do you think you're a basic developing advanced leading? And this, you can compare this against industry standards. So it's a bit of a benchmarking exercise. You can benchmark yourselves against other mining companies. You can benchmark against other sectors to see where you are. And actually what we're looking at is, if you break those people, plant, process, technology down, there's about 12 main elements that you can look at. And you can say, on competency, framework, and training, what is the program you have in place? But then also, how is it implemented and how is it working as the leadership living, are the leadership living here? And you can break those down and you can work out where the gaps in the organization are, where the vulnerabilities are, and then you can obviously fix those. And as I said, you can benchmark against those. So, I'm conscious of time. That's all I really wanted to say. I guess I know we have got Q&A now, but I'll leave you with a couple of questions. Are you, when you look at this, are you sort of comfortable that you're understanding the full sustainability risk, and then understanding the organizational integrity and maturity to deal with that risk? And then I think once those are done, the next thing really is, are you maximizing the opportunity to enhance and value and enhance performance? And I think those sorts of questions I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. I was also warned that we are kind of like exceeding